Recording? Okay, thank you. Welcome, my dear colleague and students. Thank you for joining us for today's dissertation proposal defense by Alex Butch Smith. We call him Butch. So my name is Daphne Wang, Associate Professor of Finance. It was my honor to co-chair this dissertation with Dr. Robert Olmos, Professor of Accounting. We are happy to have Dr. Catherine Megan, Assistant Professor of Accounting and Finance, serve as a committee member together with our external member, Dr. Marvin King. Please note we have many C-suite professional, not C-suite executive here today. It's not April Fool joke, okay? Dr. Olmos is a CMA, Dr. Megan is a CPA and CMA, Dr. King is a CFA, and Butch is a CPA and CFP. I'm the only one that doesn't have a C. So many of you know Dr. Olmos and Dr. Megan very well in their research contribution to JIU and DCA. But you don't know our guest member, Dr. King. This is his first time serving on JIU's dissertation committee. Dr. King is a chartered financial analyst, designation holder CFA, Professor of Finance, Department Chair at Coastal Carolina University for the past 17 years before he became Dean of Business School at Coker University last year. I'm so happy to have all of them serve on the committee. Thank you. Butch is one of the DBA 5 students. We started this committee and worked together since last spring semester. As I mentioned earlier, Butch is a CPA and a Certified Financial Planner, CFP. He manages his own financial planning and wealth management practice in South Carolina for many years. He also has extensive industry experience in real estate, retail wholesale, professional practice, and so on. He is also a full-time faculty at Coastal Carolina University. The topic of this dissertation proposal is really related to his professional experience and academic interests. Specifically, this is about company dividend and share buyback policy after Tax Reform Act in 2003. He also investigated the impact on the individual shareholders' ownership and the wealth. This proposal defense is scheduled to finish in 1 hour by 11 o'clock. I will give Butch 30 minutes to present his proposal, followed up by the comment and the question from the committee member. Please do not interrupt during his presentation. Hold your question and check comment. If we have time left, we'll open the floor to other faculty and students. Thank you very much for your patience and cooperation. Without further delay, Butch, it's your time. Please take the floor.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wang. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of a beautiful Friday to come and listen to me drone on about my dissertation proposal. I think Dr. Wang's done a excellent job of identifying all of the committee members and their qualifications. So I'm going to skip this slide. I'm going to go on and tell you a little bit about what we're going to look at today. I've got an abstract. We're going to look at the importance of this study. We'll look at what contribution I hope to make with this study. We'll take a little time to discuss some of the existing literature. Then we'll get into the research questions and hypotheses that relate to them. Take a minute to look at the sample and the data, and then discuss a little bit about the methodology and kind of go over the preliminary results that we got with some descriptive statistics. All right, so I think Dr. Wang probably covered most of this. This paper has 3 areas that it examines. One is firm choice of dividends or repurchasing shares in the aftermath of the Jobs Growth and Revenue Reconciliation Act 2003. And I refer to that, you'll hear me to refer to that as JGTRA. And then it looks also at a sunset provision and its impact after it was lifted in 2012 as part of the American Taxpayer Relief Act, or ATRA. You'll hear me refer to it as ATRA. And then lastly, and I don't think Dr. Wang mentioned this, but we'll take a look at each option for returning cash to shareholders, either dividends or share repurchasing, and try and make a determination as to which one is a better creator of wealth for the shareholder, not firm value, but shareholder wealth. So slightly different lens that I'm going to examine that question on. Just a brief history of some of the major tax acts that have an impact and historically have had an impact on the choice between payment of a dividend or the payment or the decision to repurchase shares. Just as an aside, real quick, dividends would be usually and historically taxed at high ordinary income tax rates, whereas share repurchases result in a capital gain, and those were taxed at a significantly lower rate at times. At other times, it was a lower rate, but it was not as significant. So we started off with the Revenue Act of 1913, and that Revenue Act essentially was the beginning of the income tax, permanent income taxation of individuals in America and corporations too. We then, and at that point, dividends and capital gains were taxed at roughly the same rate for individuals. The dividends received by corporations are a little different, but it's not germane to this study. And then in 1921, there was a Revenue Act that gave capital gain treatment and a lower tax to any kind of what would have been back then a share repurchase. It was a period then of a number of years where there really wasn't nothing much changed there until you got to the Tax Reform Act of 1986. That was a massive tax reform act, as most people know. And the capital gains tax was increased slightly. In other words, dividends didn't receive any break at all. They just increased capital gains taxes slightly, but they were still taxed at a lower rate than dividends. And that kind of sets us up for what happened in 2003 with the Jobs Growth and Revenue Reconciliation Act, or JGTRA. And at that point, dividend taxation and capital gains taxation were in parity. In other words, they're taxed at the same rate. And what that did, it enabled some studies to be done as to the choice by firms and also choice by individuals about how they wish to pay or receive, cash from corporations. With that act, though, there was a little bit of a caveat. That particular portion of the act, the tax parity portion of the act, was set to sunset actually in 2008, but they kept extending it and extending it and extending it until finally they made it a permanent feature, or as permanent as tax legislation is. in the American Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012, or ATRA. So this lower rate on dividends, this tax parity with capital gains, became more or less a permanent feature of the tax law at that point. All right, so the importance of this study is, as with a lot of these studies, firms, when they have a surplus of cash, they're faced with the question, the first question is, well, do we reinvest it or do we return it to the shareholders? If they decide to return it to the shareholders, then you've got basically two choices there. You can return it as dividends, or you can return it in the form of share repurchases. And of course, they each have their pros and cons. Dividends carry with them a sort of a reputation of being see. Once you start paying dividends, it's hard to stop paying dividends. So some firms opt for share repurchases at different points in the life of the corporation. The timing of those is more under the control of the firm. So the firm's concerned with that from a capital structure standpoint, but investors also are concerned with which form the payout takes. Some like dividends, some don't like dividends, some fit a particular financial situation for an investor better than the others. And prior to JEGTRA, the tax treatment was generally always in favor of using share repurchases due to their treatment as long-term capital gains. So, in some sense, it was kind of a win-win situation. Individuals got a lower tax rate on capital gains versus dividends, and also corporations could certainly take advantage of the non-stickiness, lack of a better word, for share repurchases. They could time those to their advantage. So what happened there was JEGTRA came along and eliminated this difference in taxation for the first time in 2003, but it was subject to a sunset provision in 2008. So that's the first kind of opportunity to study the impact of this tax law on the three areas that we've talked about. Then in 2012, as a result of ATRA, that provision that lowered the tax on dividends to parity with capital gains taxation was made, more or less permanent. That's the second opportunity where we can kind of look into reactions by firms and also reactions by individuals. Firm valuation also is affected by these decisions, and whether or not they retain the cash or invest it internally, as well as the form in which, if they do decide to distribute, the form in which that distribution is made. So the contributions here. A lot of the studies, and we'll see some of them in the literature review, but a lot of the previous studies are very short-term in nature. It looked at the same issues that I'm looking at in this paper, but it looked into them on over a very short window of time. This study will look at it in a longer-term window of time, and that's reason for that's probably multifold. Tax legislation usually has some sort of social or economic objective associated with it. And when Congress passed JEGTRA and then subsequently eliminated the sunset provision with ATRA, they're not making short-term decisions in these cases, and that's evident from the fact that nothing's changed since 2003. Nothing has changed. These two forms of payments to shareholders, the taxation has remained the same. All right, so we'll look at it in terms of the firm's choice of how they want to return cash to shareholders. And then we'll look at it also from the investor's perspective in terms of, is there a shift? Do they shift between share repurchasing companies to companies that are offering to pay a dividend since the enactment of JEGTRA? Then the other thing is, look, some of the literature made mention of the fact that because there was a sunset provision in the original law concerning the tax parity or the reduction in taxation on dividends at the individual level, that it would have had a chilling effect on two things. One is firms initiating or changing the dividend payments in lieu of share repurchases, and also individual investors perhaps being willing at that point to make changes in their existing portfolio allocations between companies that do one or the other of those forms of rewards. And so when ATRA eliminated those two issues are no longer there. It's a good opportunity to look at behavioral changes both from the firm standpoint and from the individual investor standpoint. And we look at it in terms of a couple of years there. The other thing and the last thing, and I find this the most interesting thing, and I just honestly, at this point, I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I've got a suspicion. But what I find, and Dr. Lang mentioned this in my practice, my clients aren't necessarily concerned about firm value, and a lot of the literature that I've read, they look into firm value as a result of this tax law change. My clients are less interested in firm value. They're more interested in their value. And so in terms of, the goal of finance being the creation of shareholder wealth and increasing shareholder wealth, I propose in this paper to use a measure of that, in this case, Jensen's alpha, to measure the excess of the actual returns compared to the predicted returns over the period that follows from JEGTRA, in terms of measurement for those dividend paying firms, and then measurement also for those firms that do share repurchases. Just well, simple in theory, a theoretically simple comparison of Jensen's alpha between those two groups of firms. All right. So the literature review, we start with the sort of historical drivers of firm rewards to shareholders. So these are all more or less theoretical studies, and I'm not going to dwell on them because I think most people are especially in finance and even in general business, have heard these names before, and they pretty much know what I would say. So if you look at dividends and their impact on firm value, the cost of capital, et cetera, there were some studies. Dr. Benjamin Graham and Dodd looked into this matter as early as the 1940s, and of course their conclusions were that dividends were a primary driver of firm value. That was also the assessment of these following: Walter, Gordon, Lintner. Each one of them had maybe a little slightly different spin on it, but generally they were of the same opinion that dividends are are strong drivers of firm value, and the preferred reward for investors. Excuse me, I've got a little head cold or something going on. And that, they also looked at corporate taxes, and they just said that, tax impacts at that point mainly came from the corporate taxes, and they simply reduced the dividend paying capacity of firms. Then we had, some seminal works by Modigliani and Miller. I think everybody's familiar with that, capital irrelevance theory, the dividend irrelevance theory, which basically said there's no difference in terms of how cash is distributed to shareholders. There's no difference in capital structure. It doesn't matter because long story short, it all gets factored back into the cost of equity. That was their major thrust. Of course, they caveated that by saying, well, this is only true if there are no frictions involved between the two. There's no differences in treatment of the two types of capital, debt versus equity. Well, 1963, I think it was Miller came along and said, well, we might have gotten that slightly wrong, or didn't consider the fact that there is an impact from taxes. In this case, he was speaking about corporate taxes. And Modigliani didn't comment on it other than to say, well, I don't have to comment on everything my partner says. I don't disagree with what he's saying. So there was some minor correction of previous theories there. Additionally, much later actually, Miller did a study where he came to two conclusions. One is that there is a personal tax consideration when you look at the payment of bond interest versus the sale of an equity. So here we get into this difference between ordinary tax treatment at the individual level for interest, bond interest, versus a capital gains treatment for the sale of stock, i.e., in this study's view, a share repurchase, although that applies to any equity sale. So as early as this point, there's already some thought developing that, hey, individuals and the individual taxation of things that cause ordinary income treatment versus capital gains treatment may have an impact on both the firm's choice in financing and the rewards that flow from that, and also an individual's choice. So, but he came to the conclusion, he mentioned this sort of as an aside, that dividends are still the preferred method of rewarding capital providers. So still kind of in agreement with Graham and Dodd and all the ones, Gordon, all the ones that came before. Then there's another stream that talks about investor strategy. And this leads to something that we'll look at later called the clientele effect. And basically, Black and D'Angelo and Masulis, and you'll see D'Angelo, there's two of them, they're very active in this area, do a lot of research in this area. But basically what they said was, regardless of what a firm does, if they pay dividends or they repurchase shares, investors will decide how they're going to arrange their investments to maximize their own yields. And then Black extended that a little bit further, something he called the dividend puzzle, by focusing in on, well, how does it affect the value of the firm, this choice? If dividends are supposed to drive firm value, so he's taken a little slightly different position than the researchers have gone before. sort of why don't they? Because his research indicated that the lower taxes on the capital gains, and in this case share repurchases, would drive a higher firm value. So he's stepping off of the base there a little bit, trying to steal second.
Butch, Butch, I need to remind you, it's a 1028. You need to speed up because we haven't finished the literature review. We still got the methodology we need to talk about. We need to save some time for a committee member to make comment. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, the rest of this just sort of reinforces where we're heading with this. So what I'd like to do at this point is just skip through this and get over to the research questions and run through those pretty quickly, I guess, at this point. So the first research question has to do with the firm choice as a result of the passage of JECTRA in terms of, well, are they going to pay dividends, or are they going to do share repurchases? So that's the first research question. What's the long-term effect of this on the firm choice between the two? And the first hypothesis then is that the number of dividend-paying firms will increase over the period after the enactment of JECTRA. And if you look at this as a dividend dummy is the dependent variable. So we're talking about a logit model here, and the independent variable is the indicator variable. It's no, it's a dummy variable. Excuse me. Whether we're looking at the post enactment period. Okay, so is there a correlation between those two? Does it increase in the post enactment period? Just to run through the control variables, and I only do this once because they're the same for each one of these hypotheses and every research question. We'll look at cash holdings because firms that hold cash tend to pay dividends. Return on equity, higher returns on equity, those firms tend to pay dividends. Free cash flow, firms with higher free cash flow tend to pay dividends. Growth firms tend not to pay dividends because they're consuming cash in their growth. Total assets, firms with higher total assets are, we're expecting them to pay out more dividends in the aftermath of the enactment of JECTRA. Leveraged firms, okay, use cash to pay for the leverage, the cost of leverage, the cost of debt. So may not pay as much in terms of dividends. A life cycle, firms that are further along in their growth and life cycle, they tend to pay more dividends. Market to book, a high market to book ratio tends to indicate firms are matured and maybe in a position where they've got current income and they'll be paying out more in terms of dividends there. R&D consumes cash. Mergers and acquisition consumes cash, so no dividends or lower dividends. Say no. And then we look at some of the economic factors that may have some impact, which would be real GDP, core CPI, or the change in core CPI, okay, year over year change, and interest rates, because each of those will have some impact depending on which way they're going on dividend payments. Okay, and that brings us to hypothesis 1B, and I will just point out here that again, this is a logit model, and because we've got a dummy variable, and we're looking at, well, excuse me, yeah, 1B. So we're looking at share repurchases in this case, and we're looking at them in the post 2003 period also. Same approach, but we're just seeing what happened with share repurchases, number of firms that may have chosen to repay or to repurchase shares. after enactment. And all these are after enactment. You'll see that post 2003, post 2003. So hypothesis 1C and 1D, instead of looking at the number of firms, we're looking at the percentage of either dividends here in 1C, and in 1D, it's the percentage of share repurchases. In other words, we're looking at a ratio of each of those to total payout. And we're hypothesizing that the dividends will increase over the period post-JEGTRA. And we're going to compare that to periods prior to JEGTRA. We've got data there. The other one is the share repurchases, and we're hypothesizing that it's going to decrease during that period. And we'll see. All right, that brings us to research question number 2. This is the research question that looks into what happened because of ATRA, and they made the reduced taxation on dividends more or less permanent. And so what we're going to look at on each of these is the rate of change in the ratio of dividends to total payout. In the case of dividends, we're going to say that we expect it will accelerate after that sunset provision was actually eliminated in 2012. And we're going to say the same thing about, we're going to look at the same thing, but in terms of a negative change in the ratio of share repurchases to total payout. And we're going to say that that negative change accelerated after the provisions of JEGTRA became permanent. All right. Research question number 3. So research questions 1 and 2 look at it from the firm perspective. Research question 3 looks at it from the investor's perspective. And what we're looking to find is, was there a long-term shift towards individual ownership of dividend-paying stocks after JEGTRA? So we'll look again at the ratio. So another ratio, we'll look at the ratio of individual owners of dividend-paying companies and say, okay, to total ownership, did it increase over that period? We expect that it did. 3B, we're looking at that period again after the permanency of the reduced dividend taxation in 2012, and we're saying, you know what, it should have even accelerated. This ratio should have accelerated. There's more individual owners now of dividend-paying companies. And then question number 3 is the 3C, excuse me, is sort of the opposite of that. So we're examining the question from both sides here. Did dividend payments, the owners of dividend-paying companies increase, but also did the ratio of individual owners to share repurchases decrease over the period after enactment? And then again, we look at the rate of this negative change, and we expect that it accelerated after things were made permanent in 2012. This is the last research question there that we're going to use here. And here we're going to use a methodology called seemingly unrelated regressions to examine these research questions and the hypotheses. I don't know why that just changed, but anyway. So what we're really examining here is there a difference? Does it make a difference in terms of wealth creation for our shareholders if a firm pays dividends or if they utilize share repurchases? And our position here is that there will be a difference. And Jensen's alpha for firms who pay dividends will increase compared to those that engage in share repurchases. That's what this first set of equations do. We run these side by side in the SUR analysis, and we've got we introduce an interaction variable here post 2003 underscore div, which is going to examine this relationship between the dividend and the alpha. Okay, and then we also do it another interaction for share repurchases. The last two hypotheses, and this is the last research question also, it just simply looks at it in the same questions in the post 2012 period. Okay, so we're seeing if, hey, did the permanency have an impact? Did it accelerate things? So we expect that it does for dividends. In other words, we're expecting that dividend paying companies have a higher Jensen's alpha versus share repurchasers for both periods under study here. We're expecting to see a difference there, higher Jensen's alpha. And Jensen's alpha is simply a measurement of the actual return a stock receives or earns, in this case over a year's period, over the expected return that is predicted by the capital asset pricing model. So it's a fairly simple measurement. Okay, I'm out of time. My clock is honking at me. I've gone
No, let's continue to talk about your sample and data and your methodology.
Okay, so we'll talk about it. I'm just going to run through this very quickly, if I can get there. Something's going on with my. I'm sorry, y'all. Something is going on. There we go. So if we look at the sample and the data, we're looking at a period from 1986 to 2018, and we're looking at annual data. As a result, we come up with a sample of 14,000, a little over 14,000 publicly listed firms, and we're drawing that from the S&P Capital IQ CompuStat database. And out of that sample, there's a total of close to 110,000, 109,000 firm year observations. So individual observations is 109,000. It's a large database. So some of the other places that we're going to pull things from is Mergent Online. We're looking there for the total ownership and the institutional ownership, because they report those, and then the difference we're going to attribute to individual ownership. May not be perfect, but it'll be close, and it will work in this case, we feel. And then the FAMA French data website, we're going to pick up risk-free rates and the market risk premium and all that for the Jensen's alpha calculation. And then, of course, the Federal Reserve for the macroeconomic data. We're going to Winsorize at the 1 and 99th percentile. I've already covered these, I think, for the most part, so I'm going to skip on through. Covered the control variables. Methodology. Of course, we're looking at the frequency analysis. We're going to do t-test and Wilcoxon, and look at the means and medians between the two groups. We're going to look, we got the Pearson correlation analysis. We've done that initially. We got some panel data analysis we're going to do. We're using the logit regression and ordinary least squares. And I didn't identify it, but we use ordinary least squares and the logit in research questions 1 through 3, and then the SUR for research questions number 4. We'll do the multicollinearity test, and then we'll use generalized least square models for robustness to control for autocorrelation from our panels and our cross-sectional correlation and I can't ever pronounce that word. Heteroscedasticity for these other research questions. And then we'll probably remove we'll definitely remove the finance and utility sector, because they're historically big dividend payers, and see if that makes any difference. And we'll do the same for the financial crisis, because that was it was kind of a unique period of time. Okay, and I guess in the interest of time, we've got some preliminary results. I'm prepared to talk about that, but I just don't think I'm going to have time if I'm going to give the committee members and maybe other faculty some time to comment. So I'll do whatever you'd like me to do there. It'd probably take me another 5 or 10 minutes to go through this.
Butch, we can stop here. And as we consensus, we want to give chance for the committee member to ask you a question and give you feedback. Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, so you just keep your slide there. Okay, so let me start from the co-chair, Dr. Omas.
Hi, Butch. First of all, first of all, in the interest of full disclosure, I want to be clear that although I'm a co-chair on this, Dr. Wang did the heavy lifting. Actually, Butch did the heavy lifting, and Dr. Wang came in second. I guess is the way to put that. So, but I have had a chance to go over your paper a couple of times and participate in discussions, and so I wasn't totally useless. I thought you did a nice job. I'll just say, and I think this is so important, you did a nice job in really going back and reading the literature and incorporating it in your paper. That's so important in these dissertations, and I know it takes a long time, and I know you spent a long time doing that. So that literature review that you did and the literature you studied in conjunction with your occupation, with your profession, really has added a lot to the paper, I think. I like your models. I think they include a lot of good controls. It's obvious that you've read the literature by looking at your models. So I really enjoyed it. Just to make a comment or two, and we can talk later for sure. But I thought you did a nice job, and so you're kind of arguing sort of that this dividend tax cut in 2003 was good for dividends, and it even later on you provide evidence, or may provide evidence, that it increases the value of the firm. And so I thought you did a nice job of providing these countervailing factors that may favor share buybacks. And you mentioned how dividends are sticky and that share buybacks are more flexible for companies because they can time these buybacks to coincide with their cash flows. That's great, because you're not afraid to, you always want to present both sides of the story. And I think you did a good job there. Something I thought of, just maybe to add something here very quickly, is that another reason that companies may favor a share buyback, of course, is that they think their company is undervalued. They think their company is cheap. And so I noticed, so this may be maybe a little robustness test. I don't know if it works or not. It'd be so easy to find out if it would, though. I noticed that, so for an undervalued company, maybe the company, if the company feels like they're undervalued, they may eschew dividends and instead buy back their own stock because they think it's a good investment. And so one way to investigate that, I noticed that one of your controls is market to book. You've got that in there. And so what you might be able to do is take your dividend logit model with your dividend dummy, regress it on your dividend tax cut time dummy, and then take the lowest quintile of the market to book firms. These are firms that have low market value versus book value. These are, you could argue that's a proxy for undervalued firms. You see that in paper, or low PE companies, but you've already got market to book. And then interact that and make that a dummy. And so take that lowest quintile of market to book firms, interact it with your tax cut dummy to see what happens there, and see if there is some sort of a tendency for these undervalued companies to buy their own stock back versus maybe highly valued companies. So that's just something I thought of here as I was listening to your really great presentation. So I'll let it go at that. We don't have much time left, but once again, I thought you did a great job, and I'm looking forward to a great defense later on. Thank you, Butch.
Thank you, Dr. Omas. It's an interesting question, and in my reading, I have seen where that very issue has been looked at. So there's some literature out there. I can go back and look at that, I believe.
Okay, great. Dr. Megan?
Hi there. That was a
Hello.
great job on your presentation. You've done a lot of research, and I can tell you're very passionate about these questions, and that's really great. I have some comments I'll send you over the weekend. In the interest of time, I'll try to focus a little bit. I agreed with some of the things Dr. Omis was talking about. Part of what I had trouble with reading was that I kept feeling like I was being led down a firm valuation road. And then, but you're saying you're really focusing on shareholder wealth maximization. So I think just kind of shifting your theoretical framework should be focusing on payout preference, which, as Dr. Omis just talked about, there could be a firm valuation issue in the company's payout preference. But then make sure we're very clear that we're looking at a shareholder wealth maximization, because that's a different set of literature than the firm valuation. I found that just a little bit confusing as I was reading it. I was looking and read everything after that in terms of firm valuation when that was really not what you're doing.
Right. And can I ask you a question about that? Because, and it may be that I just haven't found a lot of the articles that are out there that look at it from a shareholder wealth maximization standpoint. But yes, you're exactly right, and I have noticed that. I noted that also. But the vast majority of the literature that I have found deals with firm value.
Yes.
You know, from the perspective of the firm.
That is 100% true.
Maybe I can pick your brain and get some you know, give me a few clues, send me to a few articles. I honestly can find them.
Yeah,
I think I
it's harder to find.
Breaking news around here, Dr. Megan. You're bursting my bubble.
No, you actually are. I think your long-term viewpoint is very important, and also there's very little focus on shareholder wealth maximization because it's hard to measure. So you having a measure for it is helpful.
And I get it.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, look, finance people want to look at firm value.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And I did that a little in my dissertation. So I've got some of that in there. But yeah, we need to focus more on because you're looking at a tax change, we need to focus more on the tax implications of payout preference. And then the firm wealth maximization, I'm sorry, shareholder wealth maximization is kind of a separate issue. The other thing, I mean, I have some ideas about your hypotheses. I think you really just have 3 and you're testing each of them a couple different ways, but that's structural and I can get with you on that. One thing I did want to emphasize, because we have other doctoral students on the call, is when you do this dissertation, you become the expert in this topic. That's kind of what a dissertation is saying. So you need to make sure that you are getting all that relevant literature. And as you said, you're having difficulty. I'm happy to help you, find these things, because I think you only have a few citations after 2010. So the historical stuff is amazing and important, and we could do a historical paper for the accounting history journal. But you need to have very up to date to show everyone that yes, you are seeing everything, even if you don't want anything that is exactly what you did, of course, but things that are relevant to payout preference.
Sure.
So I'll leave it at that. I have stuff that will be coming to you in detail, but that was just something I wanted to emphasize, is you need to really be that expert.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate your comments there.
Thank you, Dr. Megan. Dr. King.
Hi, yes, thank you. So yeah, great comments so far. I agree with both committee members and some of the thoughts. One thing that I'd like to see, and you started to allude to it a little bit when you talked a little bit about your control variables, and it kind of relates to that idea of firm value, and it's more of the high book to market versus low book to market, or market to book in your case, and looking at growth versus value firms. So the thought there is, and as I said, you have the essence of it, where we typically think those growth firms are those firms that aren't necessarily paying dividends or even thinking about share purchases, right? So their goal is to give the benefit of that high growth for those shareholders. But you do talk a little bit about that, the effect of these acts and the change in the thinking of those firms. And I think that it's going to be important to identify specifically whether that effect is actually adhering to their policies for those growth firms. So, thinking about maybe decomposing your sample into a high market book versus low market book, and then looking at that. So I don't think you need to change any research questions, but just having that decomposition in your whole sample and really seeing, is this having a stronger effect on one segment of that population of value versus growth. And I think that'll be a good way to address some of the value issues and the differences across those samples.
Okay, good point, Dr. Keene. I appreciate that. I think that'll be easy to do.
Yeah, I think Dr. King's comment is very similar to Dr. Omer's comment, and we can do the quantile, or we can do the two group, high marketable or low marketable, in order to show the difference. I think that's a very good comment. So committee member, do you have any more comment? We still have time.
I will just one more thing is you definitely need to take definitely need to take out the finance and utilities firms if you're dealing with tax, because it's a different tax regime and a different tax issue. So that's always taken out in tax firms. If you want to run that like a robustness with it in there, it's going to swamp any of your results. And maybe if you wanted to run it separately, if you're interested, but you definitely need to take those out.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a plan. Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Megan, for the suggestion. So we got 7 minutes left, and I see we have a Dean Witter here, Butch, your colleague. So Dean Witter, do you have any question or any comment? Okay, maybe she.
It's funny, I can hear the pilings in the background.
Yeah, we can hear.
If you can hear them, you can imagine what they sound like to me.
Okay, so let me call one more time. Dean Witter, do you have any comment? Okay, good.
My entire computer's jumping up and down at this point.
I am just here for moral support for Butch. This isn't my area of expertise, but I thought I would, Butch and I go way back, so I thought I would come and listen in. So, hello, Butch.
Hey.
Thank you for your presentation, and thank you to all the committee members for all of your hard work and deep thinking about this issue. This is going to be a great project.
Thank you, Dean Witter.
Your kind words there.
Okay,
we do go way back, don't we?
Okay, thank you, Butch. We also got some DBA 5, your classmate, and DBA 6 student here. So is anyone has any suggestion or comment on this proposal? You can help us to improve this dissertation.
Hi, Butch. Okay. This is Carmen. I don't have
Hey, Carmen.
Hey, I don't have anything necessarily to contribute because finance is not my area. But anytime I get to get educated by you, I truly appreciate it. And all of the research that you have done is enormous, and I can't wait for the results.
Well, I'm standing on all y'all's shoulders, so you do understand that, right?
We care for you.
I'm standing on y'all's shoulders. I appreciate those that have gone before me, Carmen. Hope you're doing well.
Anyone else? Last call? Okay, so if not, and the defense will be ended right now. So thank you for your coming. Please, committee member, stay in here, and the other member, please log out.